Come here. Yes, Speedy thinks they're all greeting him. Come here. Come here. So by now you've all met my sidekick, correct? He's working the room. I'll try and make him stay here. He's the official library dog at the Arno Library. He reads with kids. And I'm fine talking about Speedy. I did a talk at the South China Library a week or so ago, and the first half hour, it's like, hello, I'm here to talk about me and my books. All we did was talk about the dog. Yes. All right, you sit down there and stay. Be good. He's a shameless booch. So yeah, well, thank you, everybody. This is cool. Thank you for lunch. My note in my planner thing said any topic. So, you know, I don't know, I'm here to talk about my books, I guess. For those of you who don't know me, I think a lot of faces are familiar. I have lived in Arno forever. I had a landscaping business. It still sort of continues in a slightly altered form in Arno. And years and years and years ago, when the landscaping business, didn't really provide enough money, I started working for Mafka as an organic inspector. And that in itself is an interesting story. I should say that these things, would you stop? It's not about you. And more fun when I get questions, you know, it's more fun to have a conversation than a lecture. So the more questions the better. But so the organic inspection business is in itself quite interesting. And I did that for years, and there's a whole story there about the evolution of organic certification in Maine, which I think is interesting. But sometime, I don't know, what do you suppose, 15 years ago, probably more, a whole bunch of big maple syrup producers up on the northwest edge. I've got maps, I don't know if anybody can see, pass the book around, but up above Jackman, up that bit of Maine, from way up at the top, northwestern Somerset County, which is where the big sugar maple stands grow. And the geology of that is interesting. A lot of producers there wanted to get certified organic. There's a premium, I say I don't know what it is now, but it was 15 cents on the pound. There's a premium for certified organic syrup, which if you're making tens of thousands of pounds, is useful. So that presented a lot of challenges to Mafka because, first of all, the access into those camps is horrible. We can talk a bit more about that, which means there's really no access from Maine to the camps along that piece of Maine in the winter. The nearest Jackman, you go up through Jackman and then through the big border crossing at Armstrong and on to Quebec, up through St. George. From Jackman north, up along that border of Maine, there's 200 miles of maple forest with no infrastructure. There's no roads, there's no public roads. There are logging roads maintained by the logging companies. And that's where those maple syrup camps are. And people have the idea that maple is grandpa in a couple of buckets, a little sort of backyardy thing. These are enormous operations. They're all tapped trees, right? They're all trees it's all on vacuum line system. And where a fairly decent sized operation in, the sort of Skowhegan area, there's quite a lot of maple there. Might be, 2,000 taps, might be a decent sized thing. These big operations are running 80, 90,000 taps. And they're amazing. So there's that. They are completely off the grid. The only people with access are the French Canadians along that border. So when you can't stay in Maine to do the inspection. You have to stay in Canada and cross the border every day because there's nowhere to stay on our side of the border. Speedy, I don't want you roaming around. Come here, sit down. Come here. Oh, sit down there and stay. Stay there. You can have cookies later. So they needed somebody who would be willing to go up into the woods for weeks at a time, which I was fine with, and knew how to run an inspection because, you're out there and you can't be better know what you're doing if you're taking that much trouble to get into those places. And in theory, could speak French because all of those producers are French speaking, nearly all of them. So I go up there full of confidence, and I was absolutely amazed at how remote these camps are, how big they are, what an unbelievably demanding way it is to make a living. And again, I could talk forever about maple syrup production. And I go blasting in with my, my French learned as a student in France, living in France. And I might as well have been listening to people speaking Swahili because the extreme difference of the French, and I'm fine. I've been in Quebec and Montreal, and I'm fine there. There's an accent difference, but the dialect along that piece of Quebec there is known as La Beauce, and the Beauce dialect is amazing, and the whole thing struck me as being extraordinarily interesting. Extraordinary people, extraordinary circumstances, extraordinary product. The whole thing is just amazing. And I love going up there. It's sort of a brutal way to work because you're stomping around, completely off the grid in the snow. But it was fun, and I've done it for years. I did some a year ago, but I don't want to do it anymore. I can't stand the filling out of forms that is involved. Anyway, that got me thinking. So that there's that, and then there's the fact that my entire life, I was raised on murder mysteries. Agatha Christie's, Dick Francis, Niall Marsh, Dorothy Sayers, you name it. My grandmother read them and handed them on to me. And as far as I'm concerned, a story isn't a story unless it's around a dead body. What's the point if you haven't got a dead body in there? And the books that I enjoyed reading or still enjoy reading, stories with, just reading something like stories with a problem to solve that are not dependent on suspense and drama and, white knuckling or sex or complicated, twisty plots. I like a good story with a problem to solve. It's like why, how, where, when, how did that happen and why did it happen and how do you figure out those things without relying on the sensational stuff. And I also like books that tell you something about something, where you could learn something about a place or a people or a culture or a product or a way of life or something. And I kept thinking, wouldn't the maple woods make an ideal location to write a good story? And then explain that life, which I think very few people have any idea that industry is buried up in the woods up there. And then the other thing that was eating at what's left of my brain was the idea that Maine literary world, which is huge and fabulous, is very coastal centric, Camden to Portland to Kennebunk. And that's where all the happening is, and that's what people think they want to read about Maine and the lobsters and lighthouses and I am so offended by books, and we will not name them, Beans of Egypt, Maine, which portray life in the interior of Maine as being nothing but drug-addicted losers. and it just pisses me off. It's like I have a huge chip on my shoulder about the sort of the two mains. You know, there's the smart, wealthy, touristy coastal Maine, which is gorgeous. Let's not pretend it isn't, and it's wonderful and special. And then there's the rest of Maine. I've done lots of work as a landscape designer for rich people on the coast, and the disdain that I have heard from, you know, wealthy out-of-staters summering on the coast of Maine, a yacht out there on the dock. And I mean, I don't mean to be a horrible anti-snob, but, you know, we went to Bangor once and we were underwhelmed. And would you believe that they have a potato blossom festival in Aroostook County? How cute is that? And you want to say, how dare you, you know? And so I thought I would enjoy an excuse to write a story about that piece of Maine along the Northwest Edge, which is amazing. And, you know, you try and make a living working that hard under those circumstances, and then tell me that these are a bunch of losers. So one of the fun things that has happened as a result of, you know, writing these books, I've met other Northwoods authors, and we formed a little sort of club of people who've written books based on their experiences. You know, retired foresters, game wardens, canoe travelers, who've written great books about the North Woods of Maine. And there is a very strong and very rewarding to get to know, you know, many different cultural threads that run through the north of Maine and make for great literature, great stories, great writing. So anyway, so that was Murder in the Maple Woods. And I wrote that, and that was fun. And I sort of didn't know what I was doing. I just sort of started writing and stopped when I got to the end. And I took advice from Stephen King's book on writing and Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird, which are amazing. And E.B. White always over my shoulder going, you don't need that many words, you know. And the book did well. And I didn't have a plan. I didn't sort of want to know what the rules were that I might have to follow. I thought I was write a story, out with it. And it did fine, and that's great. And people like learning about the maple woods. I got very, very nerdy about the maple woods and the organic certification process, because I thought it would be fun. The challenge I set myself would be to use the organic certification process as the way you solve the riddle of the dead body. It's only by knowing how maple syrup is certified organic that you figure out that this was not an accident. This was in fact skullduggery. So that, and then I had these characters made and a story around, and people started saying, "Where's the sequel?" And I thought, I didn't mean to write a sequel. I just wanted to do one. I just wanted to write this maple story. But I started to bug me that, you know, another book was being asked of me, and I had always had in the back of my mind the idea that the way down east Blueberry Barrens they're not as remote, but they're pretty damn remote. Yeah. And they are almost as badly known. And it's as fascinating a crop. The two extraordinary, iconic, magical, natural products from Maine, blueberries and maple syrup, are worthy of notice. And I always ask people, what do maple syrup and low-bush blueberries have in common as unusual agricultural products? And, you know, not to be a pain in the neck about it, the answer is that they are harvested where they're grown, right? They're not planted. You have to go where they grow to get them, and that is unusual. When you think about it, almond trees and oranges and apples and pigs and wheat and anything else, soybeans, are all planted where you want them to grow, you know, given certain constraints about appropriate conditions. But maple syrup, you've got to go to the maple woods, and low bush blueberries, you've got to go to the down east blueberries. And the to call the blueberries wild is ridiculous, but they are not planted. So I thought, well, okay, down East Maine is lovely, and interesting, and one of the things, if you're an author, you can do what you damn well like, right? I mean, so you've got, I always feel like Harold, do you know Harold and the Purple Crayon?
Yeah.
And Harold wants a building, so he built himself a building, and he thinks that he needs a window, so he makes some more windows, and he wants a tree. I can't remember how it all goes, but I think, well, I can do this too. I can make up anything I like. And I am so irritated by, I have a good English long ago when I was at school, the education system was very segregated by class more than anything else. And I got a very good education, and I learned a lot, and I learned a lot of good critical thinking, and that you're supposed to use your brain before you jump to conclusions, and old-fashioned ideas like that. And it just irritates the bejesus out of me to come across people who think they have opinions before they have facts. That is what prejudice is, right? That is prejudging before you know what you're talking about. And so I thought, well, I can take on this matter by using pit bulls. I've owned some very nice pit bulls, and haven't rarely met a dog I didn't like. Some small exceptions. And I have pit bulls in my first story. The hero of the story basically is a rescued pit bull, and I thought about, and then all this silly prejudice against the northern Maine and the French and all so on. Speedy, stop roaming around. Come here. I don't trust him. You're not trustworthy. So I thought one of the things that's interesting about down East Maine, which I find really delightful and a reason to go down to Millbridge in particular, is the fact that there's a small but significant population of mostly Mexican, but I think there's also some Guatemalan people. There's a Latino community that's established itself down East Maine, mostly based in Millbridge. And it's great. You drive in and there's suddenly, boom, there's a good Mexican restaurant, and there's all sorts of multicultural bits and pieces going on. I'm breaking my heart over Lewiston at the moment, because if you walk down through Lewiston, it's lovely. There's an African restaurant and a Mexican bodega and things, so you go, oh, thank God, it's not nothing but, apologies because I am one, old white people. Maine is mostly old white people, and it's such a relief to find something that isn't. Younger, slightly different people. And I love the fact that in Millbridge, there's this weird little Mexican bit of Mexico living there. Great food. And I've got to know some of those folks because my, in order to learn and not get stuff wrong in the book, I had to go talk to people. And I've had contact with some of the folks in Millbridge before. And what a fun thing. So I decided that I would, that if I was going to exercise my cranky edge about people who have stupid prejudices, I would use, with apologies to them, the Mexican community in Millbridge as a way to look at some of the prejudice that I needed an easily wrongly accused person for my murder mystery. So, pick on a Mexican boy, and that's sort of an obvious easy way to go. So I had a lot of fun with that and got to know a lot about that, and I left out a lot. But there are interesting things about down East Maine that I couldn't fit in. I had to go through and take bits out. But it is a fascinating place. And so those were my two books. And one of the cool things about So I mean, I'm happy to talk about but this was nice. I show this to people who don't know Down East Maine, but I got a lovely big picture of the Blueberry Barrens, and it's gorgeous, gorgeous country down there, and it is an equally interesting way of life, and the low going light on your bed, go. Oh my goodness. He looks at me like not because of me. So there, I'm happy to talk more about. Does anybody, what would anybody like to know? Yeah.
Did you start writing? Have you always written for fiction?
Well, no, that's a good question. The answer is no. I always wanted to, and I think in high school there were much sort of brainier girls than me. I was more inclined to be, sulking under the desk, and who were good writers, and I always fancied being a writer, but I never saw it as something. I think that I bought into the idea that I needed a way to make a living. I needed to learn something that would earn me a living. And I thought writing was like embroidery or something, or gardening, something you didn't have to learn. And I wish I had thought differently. I would have been a good linguist. I learn languages easily. I'm very, very bad at numbers, and I'm good at words. And I wish I'd thought that was something you could do for I don't know what I would have done, but it would have been fun. Excuse to travel. But I've written always essays, magazine articles, a thesis, grant proposals. I'm good at cranking out stuff, but I never thought of myself as having the discipline to write a whole book. And oddly, I'm sure this is true for all of you. Get to the age that I am at, all people our age, start writing their memoirs. And I think that not my story, but my mother's story is a very interesting one. The Second World War changed everything in England, especially for girls from the higher levels of society. The whole social layering thing got blown apart by the war. Too many people died, and everybody had to hang together. And the very rigid social. I mean, it still goes on. It still goes on. And if you watch, I was watching the latest Agatha Christie. You realize how deeply in English life is defined by the social level that you come out of. But it made opportunities for all people from all bits of life to change the way they behave. They made a living, and then because England ran out of young men to kill or to use, by the time my mother, would never have been able to do the sort of thing she did in the war. The war was great for her. She became an officer in the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens. She was a Wren officer. She was large and loud, and she spoke German well. She had spent time in Vienna, and she got to listen into German U-boat radio traffic. They had a whole thing in the war, and it was great. She had a wonderful time. She got to be out there. They recruited women because there weren't any boys left to do that. And they recruited all sorts of random women from random bits of the world. And Mom got to be, they listened into German conversations and transmitted it back to Bletchley, which was the sort of the intelligence center. And there's great stories about that. And then, as a result of that, all the mistakes that made in the post-war period when I was born, and England's struggle with, had no food, and I thought, well, this is a really interesting arc. How, the opportunities that I had that arose from that changed everything. But I talked to my sister. I said, I need to, before we're all dead and can't remember anything, I need to sort of get some of this stuff down. And I said, I've no idea how to write a book. I don't know how to start. She said, well, then write a bestseller first. So I thought, all right, I'll write a murder mystery. But I would like to go back, now that I've done 2 of them. I was very, very motivated to prove that I wasn't just a one-trick pony, that I could do a second book. And the process was so different, and I learned a lot. Now I feel like I could, if I could still remember what I had for breakfast, which is hard, and that I could possibly go back and try to sort of, dig up the family stories. Because to write the second book, I didn't have this sort of idea in mind, to pull a book out of my butt. I had to plan it. I had to write. I did all the things that the rules tell you to do. Write a chapter by chapter synopsis and a plan it and the character development. And I had scribblings all over the walls about day lengths and which day and day 3 and day 4 and who was where. And I got completely confused. And I didn't like the book that I wrote, the first draft of it. I gave it to a very good friend who, if you're ever going to write books, those of you who do or have or plan to, you need really good critical friends. And Claire looked at this and she went, couldn't finish it. And I go, oh God, what did I do? And I go back and read it, looking at it through her eyes and go, oh God, it's awful. It's full of unnecessary filler and explanatory rubbish and backstory, and you take all that out and a decent story was left behind. And I think I've got a better sense now of what I might do. But yeah, I was a wannabe writer, but not a real one.
You're describing me as well, only I haven't actually disciplined myself to write a book. Kudos to you on that. Having written a couple of books, would you call yourself, there's a term pantser or plotter, and are you a pantser or a plotter?
Well, I'm both. I was a pantser here,
Yeah.
and a plotter for the second one.
So
When I learned those terms, I thought, oh, perfect. A total seat of the pants, the first one. A pantser is somebody who pulls the story out of the seat of the pants, and a plotter is somebody who plots it all out. And you meet people who, because I've straddled both. I enjoy this, but you meet people who are very critical of people who do it the other way. Oh, you can't possibly write a story like that. And my natural, way of being is not to plan, not to plot, but to just sort of go for it and hope for the best. And that wasn't working for the second book, and
So
I had
if
to
you-
back up and make plans.
if you were to do a third book, would you do kind of a mashup of the 2 things, or would it depend on?
No, if I did a third book, I would do even more of the plotting. It would save. I would plot more. It would save me a lot of time and a lot of wasted energy. And I would work out before I started a framework for the story.
Did you find yourself, as you were writing the second book, having plotted it out, that you veered off much from that plan?
Did I what?
In writing your second book, where you plotted it out more, did you find yourself partway through veering off from that plan?
Oh, well, you see, I backed into the plotting. I started by just going, "Bleh," and then I realized I was in terrible trouble. I had, no, that can't possibly be. What day did she first meet so-and-so? And you had to go back and write it down and then, okay, stop doing this, make a plan. And I got a big piece of paper, hung it on the wall, and I had all these. So I corrected my plan. I retrofitted my plan onto a badly organized manuscript, I think, and then realized that I should have started with the plan. It would have been a lot easier if I'd had that, but since I didn't know where I was going. And so the third book, I think it's quite obvious when you read people's writing that is a normal process. People get better at organizing their writing. And then what happens with all these people who crank out a book a year, they become completely formulaic. they have the same structure for every book. And you just plug in a different, different tree variety, a different kind of car, a different, sized person, but the stories are all the same. And I'm afraid of doing that. I don't want to do that, but I would definitely make a plot. But I wouldn't have been able to write a plot until I realized the need for it. It wasn't until I had got myself into a horrible mess with pages here and what's that? Where's that? Take the spare bed and lay out bits of paper and go, that doesn't make any sense. And it wasn't until I got myself into that much trouble that I realized the need for a plot. So now that I understand that, if the brain cells stay alive long enough, I would definitely start with a quite well thought out plot. But I haven't really got. The thing is that I could crank out another book if I had to. There's other things I'd rather be doing, and I don't think I would enjoy the process. But because if I did that now, I wouldn't have the sort of sense of fun or the story to tell. I would be making up a story in order to write a book rather than writing a book because I had a story in mind. And it's not until I think I can go, oh, wait a minute, I know what I could do here, until I get that.
Well, doesn't the plot kind of egg you on too? And I mean, I'm not saying it writes itself, but I mean, you get your ideas and you start, and then if it seems to me if you were very rigid in how you had to follow it, maybe it wouldn't be as creative.
100%, that is exactly my fear. And that was, the first book is exactly what I did. I got started, I turned the people loose, I put Simone in the woods and I waited to see what happened. And I loved it, I sort of followed her. And when people tell me there's too much profanity in the book, I say, it's not me, I'm that's just her, sorry. And so that absolutely, which is fine if you have that sort of idea in mind, and I had in mind the North Woods and the problems, and that we would end up with a problem that is solved by her inspection process, and I let the story evolve as I wrote it. And when I tried to do that the second time, I got confused. It wasn't working. It sort of was. I guess, I don't know. What do I know? I've got 2 books. There are people who've got hundreds of them and know a lot more about, how they work. But I think it has to be some of both. Because I could now go and plot out a 3rd story. But because I haven't got the bit that you're talking about, the sort of how it all works, which is not so much the action, but the why and the how, and the who is she and what's she doing there, and why is this happening, and how did that happen? That's just sort of,
But I think that sort of evolves when you let go a little bit, right?
I hope so. Yeah, I think maybe, but I think I feel like I haven't got the sort of starting spark that I had for the other 2, but maybe it would come if I got started. Meanwhile, I'm knee deep in family photographs trying to figure out. And Speedy wants to write a story with me.
Yeah.
I have a kid's book in mind with Speedy.
Oh,
Good.
Don't you think he needs a book? Speedy, come here. Come here. Speedy, come. Come here. Come here. Come here. So one of the things that
Do you sit down every day so many hours and make it like a job, or just
really bad at that sort of thing.
just when you're
Really bad. But I did. When I got the story going and I was writing, I did. I made myself. And I made myself a nice quiet nook upstairs, and I made myself sit down and write a couple of hours. And I got a very good rhythm going. Write a whole bunch, then stop, take the dog for a walk, you know, do the other things. And walking is great. Walking is, you know, and then start the next day feeling uninspired, read what you read the day before, correct it, and then that prompts you to write the next bit. And that worked very well. And you have to do that.
I was wondering if you could take a moment and pick out one of the characters of the book and describe
So what the character?
a character, one of the people in your book, and where did that come from?
Oh, well, that's the fun bit to me.
Yeah.
Because that absolutely, they develop on their own. And you become the chronicler of the people rather than the creators of them, you know. And so they come out of, I mean, I got started with, you know, I sort of, I wanted for the Maples, I wanted a young female inspector who, you know, has reasons to be out in the woods. So she's there because she's sort of hasn't found the job she wants, and she's like, she'd rather be out in the woods and screw it and go out and, you know, not deal with people, but get out there on a snowmobile is where she's happy. And so there's that person, and then she develops, and then yeah, no, the characters developing, I think that's the most fun part of the whole process. And I guess I think that if there's something I'm happy to be recognized for, because people tell me they like the characters, is that I could do that. You observe people, you know, you look at people, you think, why the hell is she like that? You know what? And God, he's a pain in the ass, but I get why he's this way. Or, you know, and you start trying to sort of understand why people do what they do and how much their origins dictate how they behave, and what controls the way people respond in situations, and that I'm very committed to the idea that everybody has more than one side. So the cranky female inspector is also profoundly fond of her troubled cousin. That the bossy, nosy, busybody down east lady is also the person who takes pies to everybody who's hungry. You know, because everybody has multiple, and developing the characters and making an excuse for them, for the person who's been rude and unpleasant in the first chapter, an excuse for her to be sympathetic and thoughtful, you know, as the circumstances change, and under what circumstances do people behave in a certain way, and that trying to make that authentic is, to me, that's the sort of creative bit, not really the story, but trying to make it so that if you read it, it rings true, you know. And why would that person do that? I don't know. I mean, whether I'm any good at it or not is for others to judge, but I certainly enjoy doing that. And you have to be awfully careful that you don't have your friends going, is that me? No. But you're all in there, you know.
I haven't read the first book, but I read the second one on purpose before this talk.
Mhm.
And it was very clear to me that you're writing what you know.
Mm.
And the information about down east and whaleback and this and that,
Yes.
and the plants, and the organic berries and all of this. And, you know, I just picked up on that, and I just enjoyed that so much, because this is the real deal. You
Right,
know?
that's what that's what I want to do.
And I love that. That really spoke to me. So, and despite that young woman and her language sometimes, but I'm going,
Sorry about
okay,
that.
I understand. I've had friends that would fit that mold years back. But someone else that had written a book, so I got this similar vibe. I don't know if you're familiar with Chris from Kaufman.
Yes, oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And he was here, in fact, when he was
Yes.
sort of unknown and came to Tuesday Forum. And I remember talking with him, and he said, you know, you have to write what you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've read a bunch of his books. In fact, I just recently read one of his, got it mixed up with yours, because it was, you know, this murder thing.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
be careful and sort him out. But he writes what he knows, and the language that he uses, and so forth. It's what you would hear
Yes.
if you were a detective and you were out
Yes.
doing that kind of thing. So when I read your book, I went, oh, this is great. I found my spot here, because you drew on what you knew, and you just, for me, just brought the whole down east thing to life. And
Well, I love hearing that.
I really wanted to know about our, you know, poor little Mexican guy, and I felt so sad, and I'm going, okay, somebody needs to go see him and take food to him, and what are we doing here? And, you know, but it just all came together, and I just wanted to know more as it goes on. I want another book to explain to me what happens to our female game warden.
What happens
You
to
know,
yeah.
but I was just caught up in the characters and just.
Well, thank you, because that is so what I wanted to achieve, you know. And the write what you know thing is, to me, I mean, there's lots of people who don't.
Right, and that's
I-
apparent when you
I-
read it.
Oh, don't. One of the things that bugs me, it just drives me crazy, is when I read a book about something that I know something about, and I get something wrong. I read something that's wrong. I have a friend, I mean, the classic examples are in movies. Every time there's a movie about anywhere and there's an overhead hawk or eagle or something, they always play the sound of a red-tailed hawk, where they make a mewing noise. And you go, no, that's not a red tail. You know, that's an eagle. That's a kestrel. And I have a friend who was a helicopter pilot, and he says that every war movie you have, the bucket, and he goes, that's the wrong noise. That's not the noise that helicopter makes. So why don't they just get it right? So one of the things, and I wanted very, very much not to get anything wrong. I got. You'll be amused by this. I don't know what to do about it. This opens, and it says, Simone letter, blah, 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 a huge boulder dropped and forgotten by glaciers a mere 25,000 years ago. Well, I read Hal Barnes's papers about the glaciation. My background is in very good biology and related sciences, but I never did a real hardcore geology course. I only have a very layman's understanding of geology and the geologic eras. So I read his things and I thought, well, that's it. The ice shield came across Maine 25 to 15,000 years ago. And I got some geologist guy who's a friend of a friend, and I got an email. You might want to correct that. It would be 15,000 years, because the glaciers arrived 25,000 years ago, but didn't drop and leave the glacier until they retreated. And I go, oh shit, I got, you know, I wish I'd asked somebody, because it's sort of detail that's wrong, but it's nonetheless wrong. And I don't want, you know, I hate that a geologist picks that up and goes, eh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I tried so hard. Get in the game, you know, the fun you can have that you don't expect to have. Almost the most fun that I got out of the Blueberry book was that I had to get to know game wardens, and it's like, you know, I am constantly now convinced that the true royalty of Maine are the game wardens, an extraordinarily cool bunch of people. And I got to meet and talk to a woman called Deb Pullman, who was the first female game warden. And, you know, these are really cool people. And got to be friends with a couple of local retired wardens, and who were willing to pick up the phone and talk. And the thing that distinguishes every game warden I've met is that as soon as they retire, they all write books, because they all have so many stories to tell. They've all had these mad lives, especially the ones up in the more remote bits of Maine. I mean, they're completely law unto themselves, and they're hair-raising stories about the whole Pelletier family that ran the North Woods for years. And, you know, chaining a guy to a tree and then forgetting where you left him. That's one of the stories. Taking people's boots off in there so they couldn't escape. Fabulous. And I'm sure the stories get better every time they're told. But so I didn't want to. I didn't want to write a story that was about game wardens. You know, her being a game warden is incidental, because I don't know enough about game wardens. And I can ask game wardens and I can read their books, but I haven't lived that life. I don't really know. I've never been a hunter. I've never had, you know, contact with people, law enforcement people. I don't know how they talk to each other. I don't know how they. So, you know, the little bit that I got, it was huge fun. You know, charging up into, I got to meet and make friends with fabulous, you know, retired state troopers, police chiefs, and I go barging into offices and they look at me like I've got 3 heads. And then you say, I want to know what your life, how would you have handled this? And then if you know, you come across as genuinely interested and not wanting to screw it up and not wanting to insult them by writing something that they don't recognize as being authentic, then they'll talk forever. That was absolutely great. I love that. And I haven't had a lot of feedback from the wardens that I know. I don't really know whether they're going, oh God, you know, I hope they're not wincing at my portrayal of game warden life. I don't think I'm that far off. I don't know. I'm afraid to ask. But yes, the write what you know. I think a lot of people, you know, oh, I'll write a story set in Italy, and they've had 2, you know, tourist cruises through Italy, and it's like, you don't know enough. You don't know how. And God help me reading books by, Americans, that's not meant to sound like a slur, written about England. And you go, what are you talking about? That's not the way it works, you know. Fine if you've lived in England and you know, really know about it, but the sort of the caricature of a culture, place, history, people, the sort of cartoonified. There's so many stupid books about England, you know, sort of making all the wrong assumptions and not understanding the thing they're writing about. Does anybody read one of these stories where the protagonist is a child in a vicarage in England and her name is Flavia de Luce?
Oh, yeah.
Done those?
I've read those, yeah.
So I got the first one. I thought, this is fun. Post-war England in a vicarage. That's absolutely my oh.
I've read that series.
The first one I read, I got, you know, 3 pages into it and had to stop because the child is called by the cook. We're talking about, you know, the late 1940s, no, 50s. I think Flavia de Luce is about the same age as me. And she's called down to supper by the cook. And it is squash and parsnip soup for supper. Sorry, nobody in England ate squash. Squash came into England 10, 15 years ago. It was not known, heard of, eaten. If it had been around, somebody would have fed it to a pig. Absolutely was not something that anybody ate in England. And you didn't make soup out of parsnips either, you roast them around the joint. It's like, give me a break. So why doesn't somebody, you know, and then I read about the guy, I'm sure the stories are great, and the characters seem fine, but it's like, nah, that's not right. If you got that wrong, what else can I trust? And I read about him, and he's a Canadian, and he's never been to England. So don't feed me squash and parsnip soup. Would never have happened. So, you know, I fear writing something. The only other, you know, if I've got a theme going here, which is sort of the organic crop production in Maine, the only other place that I think is interesting, and I know enough about, is the Worcester County potatoes. And that's another very unique and very special and quite batshit way of life. and it's beautiful, right? The St. John Valley. You go up from Van Buren, you drive Madawaska, Fort Kent. Beautiful, beautiful piece of Maine. It feels very much like sort of central England. It's this, you get past about Mars Hill, Monticello, and it becomes these wide open fields, and it feels like Oxfordshire or something, and it's beautiful. And I love being up there. Very, very. Presque Isle and Caribou have fantastic libraries. The further north I get, the happier I am. The further away I get from, coastal madness. Further from Camden and the closer to Presque Isle, the better it gets. So that could be, but I can't figure out.
I mean, kids still take off school for the potato harvest during the year, don't they?
Yes, they do. I'm not quite sure. This would be a question that would be easy to find the answer to. I think there is a break, but nobody picks potatoes. It's a break where they spend time on their laptops. I'm not sure about that, because I think there's still a break in the school schedule in the blueberry harvest, I think. Who's current?
School's out.
It's usually they start late, starts a little later.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. They certainly used to. The world is full of stories of people who used to get school time off the rainberries. I mean, one of the sad things now, one of the sort of the tensions that help make a story is between the big corporate blueberry fields, which now is what led to, down East Maine looking like this, which is beautiful, but very, very man-made, very non-natural landscape. And then the organic growers who are trying to, produce berries without destroying the ecology, the ecosystem that the berries come from. And that gets to be very interesting. And definitely all eat organic blueberries. They are.
Is the Northern Maine potato story in there somewhere, a book? Is that?
Well, yeah, there is, and because there are very interesting situations up north. And you want to do sort of, if you're looking for not competing, sort of contrasting cultures, there's a very interesting and rapidly growing population of Amish folk farming up in the county, and they produce a lot of interesting situations. They're very good farmers. They have a complicated relationship with the old established farmers there. The tensions between the contract potato growing, which with people with huge fields mass producing potatoes that go straight to the processors. They go to it's Frito-Lay and the other one. Yes, they're one of them's making potato chips and one of them's making French fries for McCain's. Yeah, that's right. So the business of contract potato growing is a challenging one, because if you work your contract right, the big growers are making good money. But if the buyer for the processors, it's very, there's a lot of stuff goes on under the table, I think, to get a favorable contract and to get called early in the day if they're taking in potatoes. If you're called late in the day, you haven't got time to take potatoes out of the shed, get them into a truck and get them down to the processor before they close the gates. You don't get paid for the potatoes and they freeze and you've lost them. And there's all this sort of, stuff that goes on that's sort of working the system. And there are people making good money and there are people getting completely screwed. And between those, there's the whole thing. And so then at the same time, there's somebody growing a small acreage of potatoes, certifying them organic, setting up a wash and pack line, washing, packing, labeling, sunshine, printed bag, straight to Trader Joe's, and the value of that bag of spuds against the same weight of potatoes going to a contractor is about 10 times. So in between those two things, there's a whole world of difficult decisions. Because if I've got 40 acres of potatoes in Van Buren, I haven't got enough to pay for a washing and packing line, because that's terribly expensive. And I haven't got enough to get Trader Joe's interested, and it's too far to take them to the fresh markets in Portland and Boston. You know, it's a whole day to take a truckload of spuds from Van Buren to the nearest market. So what do you do with them? You end up, you know, selling them to the contract potato growers anyway, because you haven't got a market. And Maine is awful about support for the sort of infrastructure you would need to help this small potato farmer and that small potato farmer. You need a branding, packaging, marketing, cooperative operation in, I don't know, using the Mars Hill, wherever, that will brand, you know, Maine, and that's never going to happen. But without something like that, and there have been attempts to do that have failed. Oh, there's so many failed efforts to bring good Maine produce to market. The moo milk thing was one of them, and so. But you know, Maine is absolutely amazing. I hope everybody gets just what an extraordinary fortune we have with access to fresh local food in Maine, which is quite different from most of the rest of this country. I go back to England, and I'm in Shropshire on the Welsh borders, beautiful farm country. Can't buy a locally grown carrot anywhere. Makes my sister crazy that I bitch about it. Yes.
I guess I thought that all blueberries were organic because we don't plant them. They're sort of-
Oh God, no! They are
So
no.
what is the difference?
Oh God, no! The Wymans,
Yeah.
they. Yeah. Awful. So. Yeah, don't get me started. You know, we're about to go into electron. So, to maximize productivity, they de-rock the fields. You know, you see all these machines, and then and now you can machine cultivate. You can machine burn, mow, harvest, and spray, and you can irrigate. And so now you've got a monoculture. You've got square miles of nothing but blueberries, which is an invitation to every pest and disease, because you've removed all the diversity that creates stability. And so now, in order to justify all the money you've spent, you're fertilizing and irrigating these berries, which is complete anathema. You know, the whole idea of the blueberries is that they're this magical little berry that grows out of this very poor soil with no help. But you start, you bump up the yields enormously. So, and you produce these plants that are growing sort of beyond they're essentially unhealthy plants. You know, they're not really stressed, but they are sort of pushed to the limits of production, and you know, a lot of lush new growth on the regrowth year and that sort of thing, masses and masses of berries in the yield year, which is a massive invitation to every pest and disease, and there's no controls there, and so now you're out there once a week spraying. And the weeds, the biggest challenge to the organic growers is weeds, because weeds, you know, because you turn your back on a field and it's raspberries and goldenrod and weeds, and so if you're not spraying and you're relying on mowing and hand pulling and you're not fertilizing, it's a challenge. There are all sorts of interesting techniques and interesting research, but and the organic growers take care to maintain adjacent populations of native plants so that the bees and the predators, you know, the insect predators that would prey on the things that are eating your berries and yada yada yada, all have a place to live. They've got to have a home. And so yeah, no, the big blueberry fields are very, very sprayed, heavily sprayed.
How about the maple? Is that organic?
Oh, well, the maple is interesting. And one of my motivations for writing the book was to, put an end to the accusations in the bar. Some fool in the pub saying, "Oh, you don't need to certify maple syrup organic, it's actually organic." True, absolutely, but there are many ways of screwing it up. And so the inspection process in those remote woods, the opportunities for contamination of the woods are very, very limited. If you've got 10 acres of sugar bushes, Skowhegan, and there's a major road there and a conventional cornfield there and somebody's vegetable patch around on the other side, you've got opportunities for contamination of your sugar bush from external sources. And somebody's spraying hops there and, whatever. That really doesn't exist up in the woods there. But there are other things that can go wrong. The underlying, I start proselytizing here, the underlying sort of ethic, if you like to get pompous about it, of organic production is more about producing food without destroying the resource than it is about the absence or presence of pesticide. Because the absence and presence of pesticides indicates a system that has so destroyed the natural ecology of an area that you need to bring in, every chemical that Monsanto can dream up to keep your plants alive. So that when you're talking about maple becomes forest management and tapping standards. So that's the first thing you look at. The management of the forest, is it completely removed? Is there some diversity there? Is there regrowth of young trees? Are the trees healthy? Have people driven skidders through and messed up the drainage? People putting roads in that are sources of contamination of the woods. You look at all that. And the tapping, the number of taps per tree, the size of the taps, when the taps are put in, when the taps are taken out, that there's only healthy trees are being tapped. That's a whole checklist. And then there's the question of materials used, of the contamination through the processing. How you're cleaning lines, how you're cleaning tanks, how you're cleaning filter systems, how you're checking that the drums you're packing in are clean, etc. Are you using one of the bits I always enjoy in an inspection is looking for organic oil receipts, because they use oils for defoamers. And so in these huge industrial facilities, which are enormous, and big boilers that you wouldn't fit into this room, amazing. And then there's a little bottle of oil, of organic safflower oil, which they use, and it's this sort of minute part of the process, but it's an important one because you don't want to be contaminating your organic syrup with a non-organic defoamer. So there's that. Look for cleaning records and receipts for cleaning products and how that's all managed. And then there's the audits, and that's the bit I use. You look all organic products. You take a pot of jam off the shelf. It'll have a lot number on it, and that lot number should allow you to trace back to the field the strawberries came from, through all the processes, the certification of the jam, certification of the strawberries, and the sugar. They all have to be traced back to their origins through a series of lot numbers. So you do a trace back audit with the syrup, which is pathetically simple. You look at the production log, and on February the 14th, barrel number 154 was produced. And then you go out to the yard and you find barrel number 154 with its label on it and the same date. And you go, okay, that traces. You can't do any more than that. But you can check that the amount of syrup produced is reasonable for the number of taps and the number of trees. And there's a sort of, that's a fairly wide range, but it can't be 10 times, because then you're wondering how you got all that extra syrup in there. My analogy for that is the mass balance. And you look to see that the amount of syrup produced is the amount sold. They make 480 barrels, and you look at the pickup record to see that 480 barrels got picked up, and that they didn't make 40 and sell 80. Then you'd have to wonder where the extra 40 came from. How come you've got more syrup in your invoice than you actually made? Is that the non-organic syrup from your neighbor that you're sneaking in here? And so those are the parts of making sure that the syrup is organic.
So the trees are tapped in the States. Does it go to Canada to be processed?
No,
States.
and you know, one of the questions that I don't entirely know the answer to. It never becomes Canadian syrup. It's made in America, sold in America. What I don't know, and John, who I recruited, trained, and he's now my boss at Mafka, he didn't know either. Because it's not something I need to know in order to do the inspections. But you go up there, you know, early April, mid-April, end of March, or where the hell do we go up there? And you know, you try to get somewhere towards the end of the season so that you get an idea of how the season's gone. And they've got 280 barrels stacked up in the yard waiting to be picked up. And then you look at last year's pickup records, and sure enough, there's Bascom from New Hampshire. They picked up 241 barrels as made. And with a little bit of cheating here and there, usually. They usually make 1 barrel more or less than they actually sell. You know, what happened to that barrel? And there's this sort of, oh, that's the Christmas presents barrel. You take 1 barrel home, you sneak 1 barrel over the border, or bottle it, and you know, you make little quart cans. A lot of people have that little piece of equipment that you can can the syrup. And that goes home under the seat, under the driver's seat, and is Christmas presents for everybody. But where was I? The trucks come in to pick up the syrup after the roads have dried. They come in the summer, and they pick up. But I don't know if they go up the Golden Road and then up the logging roads, which would be quite challenging for the drivers to find your way, or whether they do what we do, which is to go out to Armstrong and then up through those little towns and then across the little crossings that are close to the producers. In which case they have to drive back through and come. And so for that distance, that syrup is in Canada. And I think the answer is that you document and sort of close the container. You know, that you have a piece of paper that shows that you picked up from Bolduc's 80 barrels, and you come back into, as you go out and come back in, it's checked that you've got that many barrels on your truck, and that I guess that's how it works. But I've never really known exactly how that works. But I do know it doesn't become, if there's one producer there. Does everybody know Jackman?
Yes.
If you go up to Jackman on the left, before you come out of town, there's the big syrup operation there. Arnold Farms. They sell syrup in Rennie's. He's in the book. He's a delightful man. Absolutely excellent people. I got mad at him because his records were a mess, and he asked that I not inspect him ever again. Come on, you know, you've got this enormous business. You're a very successful guy, and you've got a shoebox full of bits of dirty paper that I'm meant to understand as your records. But what he does, which makes inspection a nightmare, he ships. I'm not sure that he's doing it anymore because he asked me not to do it anymore. I don't know. He ships a lot of his syrup back into Canada to a rebottler that he has a relationship with. And then it gets packed into, you know, gallons, quarts, little maple leaf tokens, bottles and all that stuff, and then comes back to Arnold Farms into their warehouse. And then you have to do the inspection. You've got to try to reconcile what's in the boxes with what went to Canada to be repackaged and brought back in. And that is a horror show. That's where I got cross with him, because he didn't have any records that showed what was going on. But that syrup does temporarily become Canadian syrup and is resold, which is a nightmare. But it's the only way he can get his syrup processed to sell, the value-added products, little bottles. I always go and buy when I go home. I used to go back to England with little bottles of syrup, and people would look at it like, what's that? I go back the next year, same bottle still sitting on the shelf. Now, the people clamour for it. So I go and buy Arnold Farms packs in little sort of 2.9 fluid ounces, they're just under the size that you're allowed to take on a plane. And I fill my pockets with those.
I would think the tariff.
I'm wondering about your publishing. What was the process you had to go through to get your book first?
Oh, that's a great question, because I love telling people this, because one of the things that held me up in contemplating writing a book was, how do you get it? Okay, I can write a book. I love being able to do it. I would never do it if I hadn't had a computer. Now you can do it on a word processor. It's fabulous. But if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have started. But then I thought, okay, so I can bang out a manuscript. Then what? And I did not have any idea. And the two things I sort of knew about were reading, I did a lot of landscaping work for Stephen King. I sort of had conversations, I sort of have an idea of, how he got published, aside from what he wrote. He's famous for having sent out, I don't know, 60 or 600 letters to get his first book published. And he had having, lived off street food, rubbish, hamburgers and sandwiches, while he cranked out books that he couldn't get published. And it took a long time, and I thought, and you get an agent and you get a publisher, and that's sort of last year's way of publishing, but it's still the mainstream publishing. And I thought, and because everybody and his brother-in-law is writing stories now, I'm one of a large number of people banging out books. And it's a huge field, and to get the attention of an agent, you can't really get to a publisher unless you've got an agent. You can't get to an agent unless you're well known. You can't be well known unless you sell books. You can't sell books. It's like, oh, I can't do that. I know. And I thought, this will never happen. And even if my books are fantastic, and I am here to tell you that bestsellerishness is not a mark of quality of book. I've read so many bestsellers recently by well-known people who have careers doing something else, who write absolute garbage, and I can't even bother to finish the books. They just banged out nonsense, but they got agents and publishers immediately because they're well-known people. And I'm thinking, oh, you're sorry, I like my stories. So I knew I couldn't do that. I had no idea, and I know I'd just get cross if I had to start dealing with people who sent me form letters. And then self-publishing struck me as equally unattractive for completely different reasons, that you would, just take any old rubbish to somebody who'll put it on paper, put some glue down the back, stick it out, and then call it a book. And I've got friends who've self-published things, and you want to say, you needed to get an editor. This book is twice as long as it needs to be. It's great, and there's a lovely story here, but I wanted to be sure I got a good editor and a designer, and I didn't trust myself. And anyway, I would never have been able to handle the nonsense of getting published, of filling out the forms and sending stuff off. I wouldn't have any idea how to begin to do that. So I was sort of floating around, and I called main writers and publishers, FWP Alliance. And I said, do you publish books? They said, no, we don't. I think I wanted to see whether there were small main publishers. Anyway, they said, main author publishing. So I did. And within a week, I had attended a little seminar on their publishing process, and I had no idea that option existed, and it was perfect. I would never have published a book if I hadn't found them. So if anybody doesn't know, they're a hybrid model, and it's really interesting. And it takes the best of both worlds. I think the design of these books is great. I think they look really nice. There's good paper, readable font, well-designed books. The covers are nice, and you pay for that. You pay for the design, which is the whole putting together of the book. And you pay for editing, which is mostly copy editing. It's sort of commas and semicolons, but also, you know, you've used this word 10 times on this page, sort of thing. There's a little bit of, and they do a sort of quality control check before they accept the manuscript. So that's useful. And I absolutely wanted that. I didn't trust myself to, you know, to do all the editing needed. And you pay for printing. And then Main Authors Publishing does some publicity. They do quite a lot. The libraries all have accounts with Matt, and they go around to all the indie bookshops twice a year. They take books around, and they set up booths at some of the big events, and you can buy an hour's, 2 hours signing space on the booth that they set up and have your books out there. But we're responsible for our own marketing beyond that, and it's perfect. It takes. I've just sent emails to Nikki. By the way, these books are both available on Kindle, which is the sort of thing they will do for you. Get it onto Kindle and onto Amazon. And Murder in the Maplewoods now has an audio version, which I was just today sent an email to Nikki at Main Authors saying, any progress on that press release? Because she promised to do a press release for the audio version, and I don't know whether that's going to be worth listening to or not, but it was fun to do. I didn't do it, I got a friend to read it. And so, you know, you've got that person to say, what should I do here? You know, how is this going? And you know, they do a very good job of going around to the indie bookshops. So I am 100%, I've got fellow authors who are upset with Matt for I don't know what reason, because it's a small family-owned business, and there's some weird people there, and a very nice dog. And, you know, nobody's perfect, but the structure, the format that they use is to me absolutely perfect. And I'm famous there for being the, you know, the publicity whore. I'm out there all the time. I spend a lot of time. I drive up to the county twice a year at least, because I just need the excuse to go up there. And I go to all the indie bookshops, and I've opened up, I don't know, 30 or 40 new outlets for Matt that they didn't know about. Bookshops and gift shops and outfitters and you know, specialty food shops and places I go into. Would you like to buy my book? And I love doing that. And so my books are consistently the two of the best sellers in every month's sales reports that we get. And that's largely because I work hard at that, and I enjoy doing it. And the people whose books don't sell that well, you know, how come your books? Well, I'm out there, you know, I'm out there beating the boards. I do it a lot. But I'm glad to have that. I'm glad to be allowed to do that. I have a friend who wrote a very fancy book that's published by a university press, and she wouldn't be good at it anyway, but, you know, she's not me. But she has no relationship with the publisher that allows her to get out and promote her book, which is an extremely interesting book, and deserves more promotion than it gets. And it's like, it's not my job. That the press is meant to do that. And I like the fact that it's my job. It's my book. I'm going to get out there and sell it and talk to people. It's fun.
What's your idea for speeding? Did you have it?
Well, I want to know what you think. One of the things that that I hate about dog owners is this need to have a known breed. Oh, I always have Cocker Spaniels and things. Why? Why don't you just get a nice dog? And there are breed-specific characteristics, and if you want a hunting dog or a working dog, you need breed. But if you want a friend, go to the pound and find a friend. You know, you don't know whether it's going to be a three-legged beagle or a retired chihuahua. So people always ask me, when people ask me, what kind of dog is he? I say he's rescue extra small. And I say he didn't come with a label, and that we reject all labels.
And he's yours.
Huh?
And he's yours.
No, I am his agent. I'm his agent, his chef, and his Uber driver. So I thought, because he's so good with kids, and he has this tail that wags like that, I have the idea that he's confused because people ask him all the time what kind of dog he is, and he doesn't understand the question. And when people say, "Is he Tweenie?" he thinks, "Well, that sounds rather rude." And he's bothered. He has an identity crisis, because he wants to know what kind of dog he is, and because his tail wags so hard, it turns into a propeller, and he can fly around the world. So he takes a tour of the world, visiting working dog breeds, and he realizes he's not a border collie, and he's not a husky, and he's not. And then people say you should go and, I'm a little dog. I couldn't be any of those things. So they say, well, the farm next door has ratting terriers, and he goes, and they're terriers killing rats, and he goes, oh, that's not me. That's not me either. And he gets depressed, and you can have fun creating little information panels about different dog breeds and their uses. And he lands back where he started, feeling very, what's the word I want? He's having an identity crisis, and he's depressed. And a child sees him and says, look, there's a little stray, can we take him home? And, there's an argument, no, we don't need a dog. And then the boy says, but I just want a best friend. And Speedy goes, oh, that's what I am. I'm a best friend. That's what kind of dog I am. I'm a best friend dog. And a boss.
So when will that book be out?
My sister is a very good illustrator. I've stacked up masses and masses. I'm going back to England in a couple of weeks. I'll see if I can get my sister to generate some pictures of Speedy, and then we'll put that together. I've got to think of the different breeds that he would visit, and make sure I know enough about them. I know a lot about working border collies, and I know enough about sled dogs. I could write a piece about those. I have to find out. I think cadaver dogs that go hunting through ruins of bombed buildings and things. That would be a nice one to go. I want kids to learn about things that working dogs do, gun dogs, retrievers.
Maybe a dog series. I mean, you've got all the material you're in.
But kids books sell like crazy, and I think Speedy is so well known. His fan club alone would justify one huge printing.
And there could be a movie as a father.
I know.
That would be great.
It's so funny. He's honestly, I've got so many stories. I was in the College Centre for the Arts. Did anybody go to that Matthew Shepard thing? That was amazing. I was in there buying my ticket, and Speedy was with me. He's just roaming around as he does. And some completely random guy walks in the other end of the lobby, and he's got a hoodie on. He's carrying 2 bags. He's off to do something he's got to do, and Speedy runs up to him, and he goes, "Well, hello. That's beautiful." Wagging his tail, he's all happy. And he says, "Who are you?" I said, "His name is Speedy." He said, "Oh, it's Speedy. I know Speedy." I don't know who you are. And I walk downtown, and kids, there's Speedy. And when I'm away, he stays with a friend of mine, and she goes downtown with him. And people look like, wait a minute, who are you? You know, that's Speedy. You're the wrong person. She gets asked, you know, why have you got Speedy? And he's famous in town. Everybody knows him. It's hilarious. He has his own. He got a Christmas card from the bank. Speedy Ackroyd. Because we go to the bank, the Bank of Savings Bank at the university, and I cracks me up. I love it. I walk through the door, I open the door, then I stand back, and he goes across the lobby and run to the door into the behind the counter, and everything stops behind the counter. If you're at the drive-through there, forget it. Everything stops, and the lady comes out of the back office, the worst thing you see about the loans and things, and they all congregate, and they all give him treats, and they pass him around, and he has, you know, it takes me half an hour to get out of the bank. I go to but on a boring day when he's, you know, when it's really cold, he doesn't mind walking on the very, very cold ground. We'll go to the bank, you know, cheer him up. So I have to come up with an excuse. I got a $3.85 check or something. We'll take that and cash it at the bank. And he goes, and he just loves it. And so when Margot had him, and I was away, I left a deposit with her. Can you take this to the bank? So she goes to the bank with him, and she says, "Those ladies are nuts." You know, they pass him across the counter to me, and they say, "Why have you got him on a leash?" He said, "Well, I thought he should be on a leash, you know." So then I go in there another day, and I say, "I hear you had a visit from Speedy and his Auntie Margot. His Auntie Margot is who makes him the bows." And they go, "Yes, she had him on a leash." What? What?
Is his fame in any way affecting your, you know, your identity? And
I am but his agent. Yes. I am nothing. I am nothing but his service provider. People say, "Is he yours?" I know that's not really the way we see it. We see it more as I'm in the hired hand. It's amazing. When I got him, he always had this really, really charming way of greeting you. You know, I mean, he's really good at it. But when I got him, his breath isn't great now. He was very fat. He weighed 8 pounds on the nose, and he weighed like 10.5 pounds or something. And you know, he was all misshapen, and his toenails hadn't been cut, and he had heartworm, and he had a row of rotten broken teeth. So the adoption people, come here. The adoption people said I could have him for free. They would waive the adoption fee if I promised to continue his heartworm treatment. So I go, great, free dog. $1,200 later, we got him clear of heartworm, and then he had to have his teeth done. And then he got all into shape, and I was living on, you know, fresh. I'm his chef. I cook him carrots and corned beef and stuff. But he was 4 or 5 years old when I got him, at least. And he had a microchip, but it didn't connect to anything. And so, and you know, he was fat and his teeth were broken, and he'd been neglected. His nails hadn't been trimmed. But he was this really friendly, nice little guy. And he went looking, when we went to the farmer's market, he went looking for guys. He went looking for old men. I swear to God. So I think he was Grandpa's dog. And he was neglected for a year. And, you know, he didn't get his teeth seen to, and he was fed bonbons. He's a terrible pig. And he's a huge, he'll go skiing with you for 2 hours. He'll ski or run, and then want to go again. And I think the family showed up. And somebody said, you know, dump it out on it was dumped on the raceway in Indianapolis. Somebody's called Speedy, it was on the speedway.
Stickers to hand out of Speedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's definitely holding out. Good.
He's found a sucker.
Yeah.
Several. several. He's got a lot of friends. He's delightful. He's really. I've always had bigger dogs. English people have small dogs because they have terriers, proper little working terriers. There's always one kicking around in a farmyard. But little dogs in America tend to be, nasty little lapdog things. So he's really cool. He's a great little dog, and he'll walk all day. He's really funny. He gets the zoomies. He thinks that nice people keep the fairways mowed on golf courses, just so that he can race around on golf courses. He likes very finely mowed turf, and he gets the mad zoomies. He disappears over the horizon, and you call, Speedy, come back. There's a black dot that you see on the horizon, and he comes towards you, and he races and he gets. I mean, all dogs do it, but it's funnier when it's him. He gets the sort of crazy circling zoomies, and he flips. He loses his balance. His wheels go out from underneath it. You're a funny guy. And he's so cute reading with kids at the library. He has a fan club at the RNO library, and the thing with kids who are uncertain readers and feel judged and criticized if they don't read well, but you give them a dog to read to, and suddenly they're reading. And he reads with all sorts of strange little people at the RNO library. He's such a good boy. He sits there and he looks at their books with them. He's amazing. He's a good boy. I think we did it.
I think that's our time, yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody.